Okay, T9B, feed lines, types, losses versus frequency, SWR concepts, matching, looks like there should be a comma in there, doesn't it? Matching, comma, weather protection, and connectors. Why is it important to have a low SWR? You'll remember that standing wave ratio in an antenna system that uses coaxial cable feed line. That's to allow for the efficient transfer of power and reduce losses. Okay, so low SWR gives us the best transfer of power and the least losses. What's the impedance of the most commonly used coaxial cable in amateur radio installations? It's a 50 ohm cable, 50 ohms. The transmitters are designed for a 50 ohm output, and that's what we want to carry through the entire antenna system all the way to the antenna, if possible, is 50 ohms. Why is coaxial cable used more often than any other feed line for amateur radio antenna systems? It's easy to use and requires few special installation considerations. For some kinds of antennas, they use parallel line instead of coaxial line, but those have to be, you have to be careful to keep those away from metal objects. The coaxial line with the shield around the outside of it doesn't have that requirement. You can run it right up against the body of the car if you're installing an antenna in the car or something like that. So it's easy to use and requires few special installation considerations. What does an antenna tuner do? The tuner matches the antenna system impedance to the transceiver's output impedance. So if we have an antenna that is not a 50 ohm antenna, the tuner lets us match that antenna to the transceiver so that the transceiver can transfer the maximum amount of power. What generally happens as the frequency of a signal passing through coaxial cable is increased? As the frequency increases, the loss increases. Okay, there's more loss in the cable as the frequency goes up. So especially when you're working in VHF and even more so in UHF, you want to keep your cable runs as short as possible so that you don't have high losses. Which of the following connectors is most suitable for frequencies above 400 megahertz? That's a type called an N connector, N, and mostly UHF equipment uses that. It's a coupler that's it's fairly complicated coupler that keeps from having impedance, what they call impedance bulges through the connection. It maintains that 50 ohm connection all the way through the connector, which is more important at the higher frequencies. Which of the following is true of PL259 type coax connectors? They are commonly used at HF frequencies. They're also commonly used at VHF frequencies, but for the test your answer is they're commonly used at HF frequencies, the PL259 type coax connectors. And those are the most common kind. Why should coax connectors exposed to the weather be sealed against water intrusion? It's to prevent an increase in feed line loss. If water gets into your feed line, a couple of bad things happen. One of them is that it can deteriorate it can cause corrosion inside the feed line. Another thing that can happen is that the moisture in there, as the energy goes through the feed line, the moisture is heated by the energy, just like a cup of water in a microwave is heated, and that creates loss. It's not the heat that you want, it's the energy going through the cable that you want. So the water in there can cause additional loss in the cable. What might cause erratic changes in SWR readings? If you have erratic changes jumping around from maybe 1.5 to 4, 1.5 to 6, maybe 1.1 to 4 or 5, it's probably because you have a loose connection in your antenna or your feed line. And that would be the first thing you should look for, would be a loose connection. What electrical difference exists between the smaller RG58 and the larger RG8 coaxial cables? The RG8, the larger RG8 has less loss at a given frequency, and as a general rule, the larger the cable, the less loss it will have. Okay, And if we look here at these transmission lines, these are airtight, air-insulated hardline for this question. But if you look here, you can see they vary quite a bit in size. And the larger cable will have less loss. And these are designed specifically for UHF frequencies and high power so that they have the least amount of loss. Okay, which of the following types of feed line has the lowest loss at VHF and UHF? That's the air-insulated hardline, like this. And you can see how it's constructed here with the corrugated tubing with spacers in between to maintain the distance. Here it's a spiral spacer. Here it's just a spacer that looks almost like it screws on there, doesn't it? I don't think it does actually screw on, but it looks like it. And to maintain that separation, and the insulation in there is actually just air, or in some cases they'll pressurize that line with a gas like dry nitrogen to maintain the insulation.